Imagine packing your bags after an overseas work assignment, dreaming of hugging your family, when suddenly police burst in, plant drugs in your luggage, and drag you to prison for 2 years. This nightmare became reality for South African engineers Frik Potgieter and Peter Huxham, victims of a disturbing conspiracy in Eswatini. The key players? Chorus Mamb, the powerful vice president, son of the king. Daniel van Rensburg, a shady South African businessman, 2 innocent engineers, caught in a web of political corruption. Their crime? Simply working for an oil company that competed with the vice president's interests. While Africa watches in fury, this case exposes how easily justice can be weaponized against foreigners. Their harrowing ordeal, from hotel arrest to wrongful imprisonment, reveals the dark side of doing business in some African nations. The courtroom verdict came like a hammer blow: 12 years in prison and a crushing $5 million fine each for Potgieter and Huxham. They were thrown into a nightmarish prison, a teeming, filthy hellhole where hope died daily. For 730 agonizing days, their families in South Africa wept, powerless as international condemnations from the UN fell on deaf ears. But this was never about drugs. The real story reveals a shocking cycle of political vengeance. The trigger: South African courts seized the Eswatini VP's luxury properties over unpaid debts to businessman Daniel van Rensburg. The backstory: Van Rensburg himself endured 500 days in Blackbeat Prison, Africa's notorious dungeon, after a failed business deal. The revenge: the VP retaliated by fabricating charges against the engineers connected to Van Rensburg's oil company. This twisted saga exposes how Africa's elite weaponized justice systems to settle personal scores, with innocent lives as collateral damage. He sued Obiang in South African courts. He won. The court said Obiang had to pay him money for the terrible things that happened. But Obiang didn't want to pay. So South African courts took his houses and the yard in order to sell them and pay Daniel. This made Obiang very angry. He felt embarrassed. A small businessman had beaten him in court. So he decided to revenge. How? By arresting innocent South Africans in his country. Frik and Peter just happened to be there at the wrong time. They became pawns in a political game they knew nothing about. Now this story shows us something very important about Africa today. We have leaders who think they can do whatever they want on people without thinking about their rights or even laws. When African leaders fight with each other, the ordinary people suffer. Frik and Peter weren't politicians. They were just doing their jobs. But they paid the price for a powerful man's anger. For Africa to grow and become strong, we need leaders who follow the law. We need leaders who protect their people, not hurt them. The whole world was watching this story. The United Nations said the arrests were wrong. Human rights groups spoke up. South African diplomats worked for 2 years to get them released. Finally, in 2025, the president of Eswatini pardoned the men. They were free to go home, but they had already lost 2 years of their lives. So, what do we learn from this story? First, we need to demand better from our leaders. We can't let them treat people like toys in their games. We need to vote for leaders who respect human rights. Second, we need African countries to work together better. When one country's leader does something wrong, other countries should speak up. We can't just watch and do nothing. This story should make us angry, but it should also make us determined to change things. Africa has amazing people and resources. We can be great, but we need leaders who care about justice, not just power. What would you do if you were in Frik Opera's place? What would you do if you were Daniel? What can we do to make sure this doesn't happen again? The next time you hear about African leaders fighting each other, remember this story. Remember that real people get hurt. Remember that we all have a responsibility to do better. If this story moved you, share it. Talk about it. Let's make sure everyone knows what happened. Because when we stay silent, bad things keep happening. What do you think about this story? How can we make African leaders be more accountable? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. And remember, Africa's future depends on all of us demanding better from our leaders. The story of Frik, Peter and Daniel shows us what happens when we don't buy.